Okay, I get the privilege of introducing our third speaker, and it's someone that I have known for a long time, Kim Ennis. Kim is Managing Director at BioQuest, and I'm sure many of you know BioQuest, but if not, I would say they are the veteran and an incredibly well-established search firm specialized in CEO, board level, C-suite positions across different functional areas. And they know sort of our ecosystem in health tech, in diagnostics, in biopharma extraordinarily well. I think Kim has been doing this for as long as I can remember. So she wouldn't say how many years, but I know it's a long time. She's going to be talking about something which is very interesting and dear to my heart. And part of her talk is about marketing yourself. And I think as we all think about this mentoring and the mentor-mentee relationship and how we really put ourselves forward, there's a lot to be said about really asking for the business and marketing yourself well. So I'm sure she's going to have great tips of advice. And I'll let you take it from here, Kim.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you. I really really appreciate the opportunity to join this group. And Maria, I just want to take the opportunity to give a shout out and huge congrats on the news. And one of the things that struck me, and maybe it ties into a little bit of what I was thinking about to talk about today, is, even in the press release, I think I read on Business Wire where the acquiring company was congratulating Maria, but also importantly, the team. And so I love the fact that they acknowledged both. And so Maria smiles, but it's true, right? It was right.
My edit.
Oh, it's your edit. Oh, well, good for you. Good for you. I'm glad that happened. So I certainly noticed that for sure. But just real quick, I'll start to share my screen. I've been in healthcare for pretty much my whole career. Certainly passionate about it. I started out as a nurse, and first part of my career was a surgical nurse, and spent a lot of time in the operating room, and found myself focusing in on open heart and neurosurgery, where I really found my passion. And then so it sort of migrated into industry, and then eventually into executive search. I know when I started this business, my mother would say, "What are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" But here I am. And but one thing that I think is just really important, and I really wish I had the benefit of it when I was in my formative years, just really the importance of really having a mentor, and a role model in front of you. And because I think it really guides you tremendously of what your potential really could be. And I've been really fortunate here at BioQuest. Many on this call, I've had a tremendous mentor in my career, Roger Anderson, and I owe him a lot. So the importance of mentorship is so important. So that said, this was a pretty big topic to touch when everybody was reaching out on this. So hopefully you can see my screen. And I wasn't quite sure how 10 minutes and how do you really tackle all the issues here. And so I thought about it, and I think I also, Frederick, I was inspired by Amanda at the inauguration, and I thought, one is, what is your headline? But I took this big air balloon because I thought about Maya Angelou and about rising up. How do you start to rise in your career? So hence the graphic here. So what I thought it was important is that if this was your year and it was a news story about your career, what would your headline be? Is really, I think, an important thing to think about, because your career is really defined by a series of moments. And unfortunately, a lot of us would choose to take the elevator up to success. But I think those who are on this call realize that you got to take the stairs. It's really about building. and really building a portfolio of skills along the way. So what I thought about, because since I'm on the recruiting side of the equation, and talent is incredibly important, and just so you know, there's no ATM in the sky that spits out talent. You know, you really have to grow and develop your skills. A lot of my clients think that it is pop out of heaven, but they don't. That said, I challenge you to kind of reconsider some things, you know, on how you show up in the market and in the industry. And nothing is foreign here, but I really want you to think about it, because first of all, how are you going to find success? My definition may be very different from your definition. I think it's really also important to think about, because your resume, when you start to think about your resume and your blueprint, it's important that you take a personal inventory of yourself and really knowing your competencies, really understanding your strengths, and really understanding what are some opportunities that you need to grow in. I think that's really, really important to think about. And strengths, just to pause there for a second, it's a little bit of can be a double sword, because strengths, I just finished doing a Hogan training, and what could initially be a strength ends up maybe crossing over to be a derailer. And what I mean by that is that you can be considered to be, let's say, very ambitious and strong and competitive, but is it a competitive on stepping on people? How does it show up at work? Are you bringing people along in your journey? Are you becoming a repellent? It's a little bit about the bull in the china shop, you know. So I think in cautious, when you think about your strengths, think about how they show up, understand how people perceive you. And I think that's an important consideration. And then the other thing when thinking about opportunities to grow, and I think this is where it's so important on the mentor side, is to really, if you can, align yourself with something like that. And the reason why I say that, especially when I know on the recruiting side, when we're thinking about first timers, let's say we're in a CEO search and we're thinking about a first timer, and the board is sort of struggling, do we take the chance or not? Often what we will look for is, who did that person work with? Who was that person's mentor? You know, a famous thing, did they ride shotgun with somebody to really learn all the ins and outs? Because maybe that person at that point is ready. So in essence, is being on the escalator at the right time behind the right person and then stepping off. The other thing I think it's important to pay attention to is culture, and on two fronts, because when I reflect back on why a hire didn't do well at a company, often it's about, did they fit? Did they fit with that team? Did they fit with that environment? And then conversely, for the individual, was it an inclusive culture? Did it support your values? Were your values aligned? Did it help with your motives? So I think it's really important to think about those components, because as you're building your career and marketing yourself, those things are going to start to bleed through. So what I love about this slide is really, what are the skills on the rise? So I think as you're thinking about career and career development, these skills I think are incredibly important as you're thinking about moving in your career, you know, and particularly from, let's say, a role that's heavy execution to now more moving into more leadership roles, which will start to bring in more of the strategic component of things. Because whoever you're working with, they want to know, can this person make a decision? How will they make a decision? How are they going to have an impact? So these skills become really more important than ever before. And then one, you know, Frederick mentioned one on authenticity, which I think is really important. And I think another skill to add on this is humility, because I think if you think back on great CEOs or leaders, they have a tremendous dose of humility. And they're not necessarily the smartest people in the room. And they're not necessarily the person that's taking the oxygen out of the room. So, and they can admit to their mistakes. They accept the constructive feedback. And the last thing to comment on this slide is the active learning slide, because I think it's really, really important. I think I saw a statistic that if you look at CEOs in the world, an average CEO reads about a book a week. So you really have to continue to be an active learner, because that starts to build your brand as well. So why I talk about all this is because, you know, to give you a real world example of how those things start to come alive, especially if you're in a job search. So I just took like 3 bullet points out of a position overview. And what companies are really asking for are the things that I just talked about. You know, they're looking heavily at IQ and EQ. They're looking heavily about fit. You know, they're looking heavily about, can you articulate visions and goals. And especially if you are aspiring to be in a small company, you know, I think it's great if you have a combination of skills, being in a big company and then moving into a small company and really being hands-on in your management. So I think that's incredibly important of kind of where you grow up. One thing that's really becoming evident is that a lot of companies now are using a lot of psychometric tests. I'm seeing this probably more in the larger companies than the smaller companies. But again, they are looking at personality, how do you show up at work, really trying to assess, can this person fit into their company? So, and as we go through an assessment process, you know, this is what begins to show up, you know, the past, you know, looking at past results, accomplishments. And I think it's really important on your resume. It's one thing to put down the roles you had, but you have to really show what you've accomplished and where did you move the needle, because that's what companies are looking to see. And so these key competencies really start to show up as companies are evaluating incoming talent. So I won't bore you with this, but this is sort of how I think about assessing, you know, when we're looking in the market to fulfill a need with a client. And then when this all comes together, you know, sort of finding your sweet spot, you know, the business needs, kind of where your strengths are, and then where your passion and interests are, you know, and hopefully that's the sweet spot. So takeaway in building your headline, who you know isn't as important as who knows you. Knowing a lot of people and building a network is key, but it's also critical that they know who you are. Allow people to get to know you, including what you're good at, what you're curious about, what you've done, and what you like. This puts people in better position to help you. And not always good for us in the business, but you will most likely hear about a job given somebody that knows you. Maybe not the recruiter. But more importantly, it's also important to have you know, secondary connections is critically important to grow your network and to help your brand. So I'm in the poetic mood as well. Amanda has inspired me, and so I love Maya, and so you can read this, but it's my closeout. Anyway, hopefully that helps. I think that's it for me.
Thank you.
That was great.